We've got a lot of phones up here. Hi, everybody. My name is Lin Yan, and I'm the executive director of the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture. And I want to thank Brandon and Shayla and everybody here at NYU Tandon and the K-12 STEM Center for having us here and being part of this discussion on science, on the future of science, the future of creativity, and the role of art and culture and what it plays in education and the future of our young people. I see that there are a lot of educators here in this audience, and I'm really thrilled about this because our foundation have a mission, which is the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture believes that we need to give people, especially young people, the highest form of classical culture. And classical culture meaning the most inspired results of human creativity from all over the world. And because that's a common heritage of all of us from all around the world. We also believe that the consistent practice of the highest form of classical culture, be it in music, in literature, in science, it's the best way to develop the intellectual and moral capability of the young. And we also, lastly, but not least, believe that the practice of that art, the practice of great art, be it classical music and others, it develops the creative faculties that is essential to the product of future discoveries in the sciences. And we believe that this applies to all people all around the world, whatever their background. So this discussion that we're having about STEM and STEAM in STEM, I think is paramount to the future of our society and our youth today and beyond. Now, it's very interesting. This month, we speak in particular, of course, about the contribution of women in science and art, and Dr. McGowan being here from NASA, and she's the first, one of the first women she said that there's only 10% of the engineering department of NASA that are women. The rest are men. And I think it's important that we allow more, not just young women, but more people to participate in engineering and physics. Now, next month, our foundation is going to be doing something around the 50th anniversary of of Dr. Martin Luther King, who died on April 9th, or April 4th, and his funeral was on April 9th. And we choose to emphasize that. I'm going to say something on that because I see these are all educators here in the audience, because there's a major issue in the United States right now around the issue of violence in school, violence in shooting, and which is a concern to educators and parents and students as well. One of the things that we are doing is we're going to be honoring and bringing Dr. Bernard Lafayette to New York. He was one of Dr. King's key lieutenants during the Civil Rights Movement. He has been in the last 40 years. He was the founder of the Center for Nonviolence in Alabama, in Atlanta, and in Rhode Island. And he teaches nonviolence, creative nonviolence, all over the world, including in the prisons of Medellin, Colombia. I mean, invited literally by drug lords and whatnot, because they are trying to decrease violence. And I mention this because in my mind, today, we need to do something to allow young people to help protect each other. And we are going to be holding an event in the evening of April 9th, Monday, April 9th, which is going to be at St. Bartholomew's Church in Manhattan, which is a musical event. But we are also in the process of organizing 2 events during the day where we like to invite teachers and students from all over the New York City to participate in a seminar workshop with Dr. Bernard Lafayette around the idea of having students form a student committee for nonviolence, because that, I think, is all the more necessary today. Gun control is one thing, but the students need to be given the capability to help protect each other. And I mention this because, Dr. King well, there has once said something that I think today is forgotten. He said the choice today is not between violence and nonviolence, but between nonviolence and non-existence. And he emphasized the practice of a creative nonviolence. But what is this creative nonviolence that of which he was speaking of? I think one side of it is beauty. Beauty of the human mind, beauty of the mind and soul that needs to be given, be allowed to be developed in each of young people to fight the ugliness, fight ugliness that exists in the world, in the society. And when a young person discovers intellectual beauty, when they discover that's when they discover who they are. And these are the discoveries that excites the mind and the soul. And these are the discoveries such as the beauty of discovery in music, of practicing the violin, of singing together in chorus. These are the discoveries that, such as those Dr. McGowan and those at NASA, those scientists who are involved in scientific discoveries. That's the beauty that is inspired when you do that. And these are the things that make us beautiful from the inside. And they make us capable of replacing despair with hope, falsehood with truth, and ugliness with beauty, and violent destructiveness with nonviolent creativity. And I think that's an important point today when we talk about the future of STEM, of art in science, of education, and in all as an encompassing point of discussion. I don't know how many of you guys know this, but last week in the news there was it was announced that the Russians now have developed nuclear-powered missiles. And I bring this up because I think it's not just something that could be used for war. It should be something that's used for peace. And I find NASA and the space program in and the United States being the first to be in space to be something really exciting, and I think it's a future that United States should, and our students should participate in, our young people should participate in, because we should think about nuclear power as something to be used for peace. I mean, nuclear-powered vessels that would take us to Mars in mere weeks instead of a year. Nuclear-powered power of stations, space stations that allow more people to live there for longer times and do experiments that will develop new resources and new materials that can be brought back to Earth to improve the standards of living for everybody concerned. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things about the future of space. And the possibility of future joint exploration in space involving astronauts and engineers and mission specialists from all over the nation. And I think that our young people should all participate in this. And to participate not just in doing this, but a new planetary culture where 4 or 5 million, perhaps, young people be trained and apprenticed to work in physics and space. And I am reminded that there's this great scientist, rocket scientist, actually, and his name was Kraft Erica, and he said something once, which I'm going to quote to you right now here. He said, "The concept of space travel carries with it enormous impact because it challenges man on practically all fronts of his physical and spiritual existence. The idea of traveling to other celestial bodies reflects to the highest degree the independence and agility of the human mind. It lends ultimate dignity to man's technical and scientific endeavors, and above all, it touch on the very philosophy of his existence. As a result, it disregards national boundaries and refuses to recognize the differences of historical and ethnological origins." Now, he actually also was the one who said that mankind has a extraterrestrial imperative. and I think that's really beautiful, because when we talk about the future of science or the future of mankind, it's about breakthrough. All breakthroughs come through curiosity, not formula. All breakthroughs in science comes through creativity, right? Through the development of the creative faculties, not formulas memorized in books. And that's the faculties that we have to encourage in our young people today, because the future belongs to them. It's their future. The world is theirs, and that's what we need to do for them. And I think today's panel discussion will have a very important role in that, and Dr. McGowan's presentation, which we will look forward to, will have a very important role in the discussion of that, the role of science, of NASA, of creativity in the future of mankind, the future of our youth. Now, our foundation holds a music and science program 5 weeks every summer. This year it's going to start in July. And we call it Bach, as in Johann Sebastian Bach, back to the future, the music science program, because the point is that we want young people to focus on the principle of discovery, to discover to not just retrace, but make the discovery that great thinkers and great scientists made. Because then you never have to memorize the formula. It's the thing that Einstein said, that I never have to memorize formulas. He doesn't have to, because he made those discoveries. And by the way, Einstein was a mediocre student, but he was a great thinker. And that is an important point. And students, and in our summer program, we're going to encourage students to determine for themselves whether there's a pre-existing harmony through the thought process underlying what people popularly say is the separate disciplines of science and art, because I think they're not separate. I think they're one, because that creative faculties through which you have the expressions in great art is that same creative faculties through which you make great scientific discoveries. And we actually have this flyer, which everybody has. So for those who are interested, please sign up with Suzanne back there. And there's a sign-up sheet somewhere around along there. And I'm going to quote Einstein again, because he said, knowledge is limited to all that we know now, but imagination encompasses all that we can know. And the future of education, I think, more and more touches on that creativity. The founder of Alibaba recently said, Ma said that we have to make a change to education because it is all about creativity. It's all about going where there is no formula, where there's things that we don't know. Now, and I was just thinking that the guy who discovered, who invented television. His name is Philo Farnsworth. He made the invention when he was 15. And why can't we have our young people make similar discoveries and inventions? I mean, Mozart wrote many of his most beautiful pieces when he was 13, 14, and so did some of the greatest classical composers when they were still in their teenage years. And I think it would be a failure of us as adults and educators if we don't create the opportunities for young people today to make that same discoveries and make and discoveries for themselves, for their minds. Now, I have a musical offering for everybody today before we start the rest of the program. We have a performance by a very extraordinary violinist. His name is Brandon Zach from Juilliard School. He's going to play for you 2 movements from Johann Sebastian Bach's sonata. It's in A minor. Now, Bach, I think, is not simply the father of classical music. I think Bach's musical discoveries shows that he was one of the greatest scientists of all time. And that's, I think, something that unity between classical music and science is something that people should discover for themselves. And we're actually going to let them do that in the science program, in our summer program. So I think without further ado, I'm going to let Brandon open up this session.
Wow, that was amazing. How about we give him another applause? Thank you. That was amazing. So now we're going to have a panel discussion of our NYU Tandon Center for K-12 STEM Education. So if I can have Ben Esner, thank you, Vicente Gomez, Dominic Denisur, Tansila Rahman, and Diana Guzman. Thank you. So I just want to say something because I was really reflecting on that piece and I was thinking about, creativity in the future of STEAM education. And I think that for me, I've been working with teachers and students for 10 years. And one of the things that I think is very important to motivate our children into STEAM is to celebrate their mistakes. So many times as teachers and parents, our kids come home and have an 8 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10, and we focus so much on what they got wrong instead of focusing on the things that they got right and also understanding why it was wrong and understanding their thought process. And perhaps maybe they understood that question differently. And maybe they were trying to come up with a great way of explaining something. And so I think it's important for us to celebrate their mistakes and be careful with how we have our verbal and nonverbal language when our children are trying to make discoveries and answer questions, because I think that that's very important. So for all the children that are in the audience and seeing us right now live, make mistakes. Be happy when you make mistakes, because lots of scientific discoveries were made by accidents, by mistakes. And so, I just want you to keep that in mind. Okay, so now we have our panelists. I just want to introduce them very quickly. So Tansila, please raise your hand. She started at the center as a Rise High School student and found her passion in engineering and is now an NYU Tandon student studying computer science. Vicente Gomez, great, started in the center in 2 of our programs. He is currently a college freshman attending Pace University, pursuing his bachelor's in science in computer science. And Dominic Denisur, raise your hand, please, so everybody can see you. Thank you. He's an NYU Tandon alum in mechanical engineering with an interest in aerospace engineering, who found his passion while teaching at our center as an NYU instructor to become a STEM educator. He now works for the Department of Education. And we also have Diana Guzman. Please raise your hand. Excuse me, Diana Lee Guzman is graduating senior at NYU Tandon, completing her Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science. Diana Lee has worked at the Center for K-12 STEM Education for the past 4 years as our STEM instructor. And of course, we know Ben Esner, who is the director of the center and oversees all of our student and teacher programs. Thank you so much for coming today and having this panel discussion. So, first question, what advice do you have for the K-12 students who would like to become scientists and or engineers? Who would like to take that? Go ahead, Tansila.
Hello? All right, I can hear myself. So the first thing that comes to mind is that I grew up in New York City. And because I grew up in New York City, I had all these great museums at my disposal for a suggested donation. So I would literally, after school, I would take a quarter, and me and my friends, we would go to the Museum of Natural History. And because we spent I don't know, more than half of our like early dismissals at the museum. We were on their mailing list, and through that, I found out about the K-12 program here at NYU Tandon. Because I found out about that program, I applied for a rise when I was in my junior year of high school. And since then, I've been able to meet like actual, like, before it was really like awe-inspiring, like, oh my God, I'm gonna meet an actual scientist. I'm gonna meet an actual engineer. And now I'm like one of them, you know? And it really had to do with just exposing myself to older people who have a lot to like say and a lot of knowledge to give me. And since it's not enough to just have somebody who's already well established in their careers as a scientist and engineer, it's also important to reach out to grad students or undergrad students who are just like past the hurdle you are trying to complete right now. And they have like, I would say, more recent and dated advice for kind of getting through a lot of issues. It could be whether applying to colleges that will support your endeavors in becoming a scientist or an engineer, or applying to various programs within that college and finding different ways of getting where you want and letting yourself just go with the flow too. It's not enough to just say like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna stick on that path. Be open to it.
Thank you. Who else?
Yeah. Awesome. So I'll
Go
take
ahead,
it from
Vicente.
here. Yeah. Hey guys, so my piece of advice that I would give you is you need to go out and you need to look for opportunities. Opportunities aren't just gonna come to you when you're in your room playing on your computer. You need to go out, take initiative, and look for those opportunities. I started with the K-12 STEM Center when I was in 6th grade competing in the first LEGO League competition. And to do that, I needed to sign the permission slip, bring it to my mom, talk to her about it, get her permission. And my mom was pretty free range. She told me I could do whatever I want. And I took initiative and I joined First LEGO League. And that started a domino effect for me into the many of the other programs that I joined with K-12 STEM Center. And in addition to taking initiative and getting the opportunities, the next step is making the most out of that opportunity that you get. Because it's one thing to do a program, but it's another thing to get the most out of it. One story I like to talk about, when I was in the Science of Smart Cities program in 2011, it was a pilot program. It's where I met Dominic here. Dominic is one of my best friends now. And I don't know if you remember Dominic, but I actually gave you my business card. And yeah.
I still tell people that story.
We have it laminated in the office.
Yeah, but I'm this 11-year-old 6th grader, and I give this this graduate student my business card, and I wanted to leave an impression on him. And to this day, we're still in contact. We talk nonstop, and that just started it off for me, and that's where I am now. I continue to take initiative in the programs that I do in college and in my schoolwork.
Thank you. That's a great advice. Who else would like to share? Dominic, please.
So to piggyback on what Tanzila and Vicente shared, as you explore these opportunities that are readily available around the city, I implore you, once you're accepted, you'll definitely have to apply to numerous programs. You won't get into all of them, but don't feel disheartened. Feel free to continue to apply. Ben at the center here is open to refielding any questions and sharing opportunities even outside of the center. I myself, in my role, and my colleagues at the DOE are open to sharing additional resources. But as you venture through these opportunities, create a portfolio. Utilize that portfolio as you go along to hone your communication skills. Learn to communicate as best as possible about the things that you're doing. As a scientist or engineer, once you get to the level of graduating or even in your programs themselves, you will have to be able to communicate what you've done to laymen to ensure that you're building that understanding for yourself and for your audience. That's one piece of advice. But be inquisitive. Never be afraid to just Google something. I myself have always been inspired and a tinker, so I would always take things apart, see what makes them work. I'm inspired by individuals such as Elon Musk. So I listen to his books, I use the audiobooks, I try to figure out what makes that individual tick to see how they got from from the beginning to where they are now. Using their trajectory to give myself some insight into how I can move forward as a scientist or engineer. And that is something that I think is very important, to learn about the history of someone and how they got from their beginning to where they are now.
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Diana Lee?
Hello. Hello. Okay, great. So one of the things that I would advise you all to do is to talk to your teachers, talk to your parents, and let them know just kind of like what you're interested in. There are lots of outreach programs, especially at universities and like community colleges. So just as was mentioned earlier, I work here at the Center for K-12, and there are a lot of initiatives, outreach initiatives. But unfortunately, I did not grow up in New York City, so I actually was part of a different outreach program back in Arizona, and that really transformed my life, and it really just had me really interested in, becoming an engineer and going down this path. So what we actually did was we did research on like circuits, which is kind of something we do here at the center, and yeah. I was able to go through this whole program by just talking to my teachers, and they let me know of just community opportunities, community programs, and even if they're not community-based, there are lots of national outreach programs as well. So talk to your teachers, talk to your parents, and let them know what you're interested in, and just kind of what Dominic said, be inquisitive. Don't, ask for, an explanation to why things are the way they are, and how you can always be better at these things. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Can any of the children here kind of scream something at me that they learned how they're going to research programs? Anybody? Give you a moment to think about it. What? I heard Google? Who said Google? Excellent, yes, Google. You can Google us. NYU K-12 STEM, and we will show up. Yes, Google. Go on the internet and find opportunities in order to come in the summer or work during the school year. What other things can we do? Teachers, yes, good job. Ask your teachers if they know of any opportunities that you can apply to or programs so that you can learn more about robotics and engineering and other science disciplines. Anyone else? Ask your parents. Very good. Who said that? Very good. Yes, ask your parents, and your parents can sit with you and research on those opportunities. Yes, thank you. Everyone is listening. Okay, excellent.
Let me just enumerate for everyone, because we're talking vaguely about these programs at the K-12 Center. So just to give you some names to put to those more generic descriptions, we run something for middle school students, and these are mostly summer. Maybe we'll have a little opportunity later to talk about what we do in schools with teachers. But the key things to know are Science of Smart Cities, which is a program for weeks here in the summer about the engineering, science, and technology that makes cities smarter and more livable. We have something called Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and the Science of Smart Cities, which is kind of a part two, a little bit more sophisticated content around cloud computing and things like that. We may have some graduates of these programs here. Tanzila and Vincente actually were both in ARISE. That's Applied Research Innovations in Science and Engineering. That's a high school research program for 10th and 11th graders. Very intensive research experience in a lab with a PhD candidate, with a postdoc, really focused on discovering new knowledge. So you're not going to be doing the DNA extraction experiment on a strawberry that was done 60 years ago. You're actually going to be involved in discovering new knowledge, which is the purpose of scientific and engineering research. Right. Tanzila did chem engineering, and Vincente was working on soils and pile driving. Yes. So if I remember right. We also have a program called Cybersecurity, Computer Science for Cybersecurity. That's exclusively for young women in high school. That's on cybersecurity and computer science to get an introduction to that. We're also running, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting things. What else are we doing this summer?
Arise.
All right, Arise. What's that? CREST, sorry, yes, Creativity and Engineering, Science, Technology. I did CS for CS. Creativity and Engineering, Science, and Technology. And those are all free. Yes. All right, so again, please get on our mailing list. Arise applications, regrettably, are closed, but everything else. Right, so Arise is currently closed. Computer Science for Cybersecurity is recruiting now, and the Science of Smart Cities cohort programs will be announced next week. So please get on our mailing list. It's super important because that's how you're going to learn about these opportunities. These are all free, and in some cases the students get stipended. We also run programs for teachers that are funded by the National Science Foundation. So we'll probably have about 50 teachers here on campus this summer learning engineering and technology that they can bring back to their schools. And for the first time ever, we are actually running something for pay, which we are calling Spark, the summer program in automation, robotics, and coding. Did I get it right? Yes. Spark.
Yes.
Spark. And so, again, NYU K-12 STEM on the search engine of your choice. Microsoft, are you listening? On the search engine of your choice, and you will find all of our content. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. So my other question is, and this is an important question for me because I work a lot with teachers, is how can teachers support their students' dream about going into STEAM careers? Yes, Dominic?
I'll take that one first. My initial response to that is it definitely takes a village to rear the complete student, the complete whole learner. However, teachers have the added incentive because they are with our students for much of their lives. Teachers have opportunities to participate in professional learning experiences such as the ones that Ben just named. So I implore any teacher here to explore these opportunities. As a member of the Department of STEM at the Department of Education for New York City, we have a whole breadth of STEM initiatives that build upon these professional learning experiences, many similar to the opportunities here at the Center for K-12 STEM Education, but more outside, more all-encompassing. We have opportunities to give these teachers institutes where they're taking part in project-based learning opportunities while learning about the opportunities that they can take to the classroom with the students, with the materials that they utilize for their classroom throughout the year. I also think that teachers should be looking at their school as a whole by bringing in administrators. Without the administrators, this won't work in your school, right? You want to build a sustainable pathway for your students to learn about these STEM careers and STEM pathways as they go through these opportunities. So developing a STEM planning team is optimal. Identify key individuals within your school that could lend to this. The Department of Education developed a lovely document called the New York City STEM Framework. And with this framework, teachers are provided with the opportunity to examine and dissect their school culture from the beginning to understand where they are within their STEM footprint and build out the program that is necessary for their students and their constituents. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. How about, maybe Diana Lee, would you like to maybe give an example of how teachers can support their students in the classroom?
So one of the ways that I would, I guess, encourage teachers to help their students get started with just opening them up to like STEM careers, STEM fields, is to be prepared and be aware of what's happening in your community. Reach out to local universities and community colleges and ask them about their outreach programs. If they don't have any already, that could be something that you could personally, take upon yourself or maybe talk to at the board of your school or the at your district. I know that teachers have a lot on their plate already, but it is imperative that you are aware of what's happening in the community and those outreach programs. And then just kind of like maybe like compile a list of opportunities just in case students do ask you about, hey, you know, I'm really interested, you know, in renewable energy, you know, what can I do about that? And you can kind of help them out. And even if you don't have a list compiled already, sit down and research with them. You know, maybe not all students have, you know, a computer at home, so you can kind of use the resources that you already have at school and help them out there and show them how to research, because that's not always intuitive.
Thank you. This was really good advice. Thank you so much. Yes, Vicente.
Yeah, so in my personal experience, I found it that I was in school more than I was in my own house. I would go into school at 8 o'clock, and I wouldn't be out of school until 5 p.m. with a mixture of school time and extracurriculars that I would do in my school. And I find it that the teachers that leave the biggest impact on me are teachers that take me under their wing because they've gone through more experience than I have. And I have one example of the teacher that I still am in contact today. I was actually with him today because I work for him now. His name is Mr. Holstein. And he was my 6th grade computers teacher, and he was my coach for the first Lego League competition and the Future City competition. And he gave me the drive to want to do more. I was in the 6th grade, all I wanted to do was play video games, and I wanted to hang out with my friends in the park. But he taught me that there's much more to life than that. I could be better. And he coached me in the 6th grade, and now I work for him. I co-coach the students that are in First Lego League right now, and I help him with any problems that he have.
Great, thank you. Who else would like to share?
So I'm going to make this really quick since everybody else really did cover everything. But working in a school and working as an after-school teacher for like the past year and a half, I've learned that my coworkers are my biggest support in being able to support my students. So one example I'd bring up is like me and this other teacher. He teaches like a podcasting, and I taught like intro to coding. And you might think those two classes might not have anything in common, but because we were able to sort of merge our curriculum, we were able to engage our students in a way that hadn't previously been offered to them. And because there was so much overlap in both their curriculum from their day school time into this after-school program, they were just more engaged in an all-around, like, how do you say, wholesome student mode, kind of, like, you stay interested. And then another, like, huge thing for me was when I was first learning Java, my professor did not know Java. Java is a programming language, guys.
It's not a cup of coffee.
It's not a cup of coffee.
I mean, it is too, but. You know.
But my teacher at the time did not know Java, and he was learning with us. And I think a lot of times that's okay. You can learn with your students, like just be a couple lessons ahead. But it's such a bonding experience, and when you get to bond with your students in that manner, like I will never forget that teacher. And like I've written him recommendations now. You know, he's currently like pursuing a PhD. But it's like, don't be afraid of what you don't know yet. Like learn with the kids.
Yeah, I want to really endorse that last part. We have, you know, we've had hundreds of teachers study with us. And in our teacher professional development programs, we often are able, through National Science Foundation funding, to be able to support graduate students who go back to the schools and work directly with the teachers in their classrooms, to be that kind of engineering support person. Because what we found, I think, in our work is, you know, while engineering and technology and science education are valued, there are many barriers in the school environment, particularly I think in the New York City public school environment, that Dom and his colleagues in the STEM office and others are really trying to break down. Those things are around, well, how much time do I have for this? And oh my goodness, I've been asked to cover the gym class, so how can I do my robotics club? So those kinds of things, we acknowledge those kinds of things happen, in large public systems, but having this idea of building a school culture, which I think Dom referred to, this idea of a STEM team, making sure that you're communicating regularly with your principal so that she knows what you're doing, what you want to do, how the work in engineering and technology and science connects back to both Common Core standards and next generation science standards. We totally get that the teachers in the room here, people who are teachers, you have requirements. There are things your kids need to know. And we don't want to take you away from that. We want to give you new tools to teach that. New ways for kids to look at the world so that they're engaged in that kind of content. And so we see things like the next generation science standards as being a very important gateway for teachers to bring engineering to their schools. And so yes, definitely apply to our programs. Come study with us. We'll support you back in the classroom. We're going to have, I don't know, probably about 50 teachers here this summer again across a range of disciplines, and electrical engineering and audio engineering and robotics. And this idea of learning with your students is really powerful. We have one program where we really explicitly do that, but we have found in a lot of these teacher professional development programs that we do, even if you're here for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, if you haven't had exposure to this kind of content in your formal or informal education up till now, it's still new to you, right? You can learn a lot in 6 weeks, you can't learn everything. And so this idea of really breaking down that barrier between you and your student and creating a culture where you're learning together and not being put off or afraid by this idea that, oh, my students might know more than me. I mean, I do that. This is my life every day, right? I'm an historian by training. Right? So like my academic background's in history, so I'm always learning more from the students that I work with about science and engineering, and from the faculty and their research and their engagement in trying to work with me to take their fairly complicated research and make it accessible to teachers and students. So really I view that as an opportunity. Like I said in the opening, it's one of the great privileges of working here is for me to be able to learn about engineering and technology and science in a way that I didn't in my formal education, but it is just as enriching. And so to be able to be a lifelong learner and a continuous learner and to learn with your students, those are really, I think, key things. And it is true that not only are there opportunities here, although ours totally rock, there are also opportunities through the New York City Department of Education and other institutions too. In life science, biological sciences, things of that nature. So just like we were telling the kids, go find the opportunities and take advantage of them, we definitely urge teachers to do the same.
Thank you so much. And now, without further ado, I know we're all waiting to hear from Dr. Ana Maria Rivas McGowan. So here we go. We're ready for you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, panel.
So good evening. What a great opportunity to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to switch gears real quick.
Testing, can everyone hear me?
All right, fantastic. So good evening. Everybody's wide awake? Yes. Excellent. They're fired up. That's awesome. That's great. Well, thank you for having me here. What a great opportunity. Let me put this water away so that I'm not wearing it. And for those who are online, thanks for joining us here this evening. This is exciting for me. Even though I've been an engineer now at NASA for over 25 years, it is great to come back and hear the enthusiasm of future students, current students, and students who are now teaching other people, right? And that's awesome. It's great. I love it. I love it. It's great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about exploring your future and what you can do for the students in the room to explore your own future. I'm also going to talk to the educators here about, how can you take the message of STEM and make it exciting, relevant, and applicable to the students so it seems exciting to them. So just join me on this journey. As I get into this, I would like to first thank the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture. Lynn Yen and Suzanne Klebe, they were the ones that thought of this whole idea and invited me to be here, so thank you. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you so much. It's great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what engineering is, give you some background about NASA, talk a little bit about my personal background, and then talk about some engineering efforts at NASA Langley, and then some frontiers of aerospace at NASA. And then we'll have some time to answer questions later on in the program. Alrighty, so getting started, what I first want to do is just give you a little highlight about what engineering is all about.
You've probably heard the word engineering before, and you've probably been told it's pretty important. But what exactly is engineering, and who exactly is an engineer? Engineers are people who design and build things that we use every day. However, they don't just go building the first thing that comes to mind. They work hard to make something we need, and they want to do a good job of it. So how do engineers decide what they need to build? Well, in most cases, they start with a question. Here's an example. Say you live on a space station, and something outside breaks. Obviously, you need to go outside and fix it, but how exactly do you do that? That's a great question for engineers. Once they've got a good handle on things, they'll start imagining ways to solve the problem. They'll come up with all kinds of ideas, and some that might even seem a little crazy. That's important because sometimes the craziest idea is the one that works best. After coming up with these ideas, they'll pick a few that make the most sense. Next, they'll start drawing a plan. Depending on the idea, the plan can be very simple or very complicated. But the important part is the plan itself. A good plan helps engineers focus on what they're making and, most importantly, why. Now the engineers get to have some real fun. They get to create something. It's important to stick to the plan, though, so the idea doesn't go too far off course. Once they've built it, then they have to test it. Experimentation is very important because it's here that engineers learn what works and, well, what doesn't. And while it's great when something goes right on the first try, it's actually good when things don't, because that gives engineers a chance to go back and improve on their original idea. And improve they will until they've solved the problem. So the next time you've got a problem to solve, whether simple or complicated, there's probably a team of engineers ready to create something to solve it. And nobody solves engineering problems quite like NASA.
So, what did you hear there? You heard creativity, right? Exploration, trying some new ideas. Right? You heard failure, right? Sometimes you have to learn by failure, right? And even the most crazy idea could be the one that's most exciting. And so for me, when I hear students come up with something that's something I would never have thought about, I always want to say, that's awesome. Can we explore that? How might we make that work? Because sometimes the craziest idea can incite something that you would never have thought about, right? And just the path of discovery of the crazy idea will make it a really creative idea, right? And then a really possible one. So when we look at NASA's journey of discovery, the agency's been around for a while. We first started as NACA, right? And then became NASA in the 1950s. So can a student in the room, none of you adults, can a student in the room guess how old NASA is? Or I'm going to give you even and make it even easier. When you look at what NASA does, we do aviation, we do earth science, and we do space exploration. Right? Many of us people think of us just as the space agency, but the first A in NASA is students only, not faculty. What's the first A in NASA? Aeronautics, that's right. So we have a program in aeronautics, and earth science is how we study our planet Earth. and understand our waveforms and our weather and many other climate details and space exploration, of course. Let's look at what NASA does. This is an example of some of our current state of NASA research. That is the current state of NASA. A lot of really fun things are happening, right, in the agency today. I'm going to give you a snapshot of our plans for 2018 later in the presentation. And so when did all of this start and where is it happening? This is where. Some students ask me, well, do you work in Texas, right? And I just got this really fancy laser pointer. I just got to point it out, right, and embarrass one of our guests in the audience. Thank you so much for this. This is a gift. How nice. So I can now point. How fancy. So NASA Johnson's over here, right near Houston. I'm actually at the Langley Research Center here in southeastern Virginia. You can see all the different places where NASA has facilities. Each one of these has a slightly different role. For example, NASA Glenn in Ohio is our Power and Propulsion Center. All of you in this room are familiar with Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We do a lot of our flight testing out in California on our dry lake bed because there's nothing out there. It's pretty wide open. It's where the space shuttle used to land. Down here at the Michoud Assembly Facility, we put together a lot of the large rocket components, and then those components are then shipped by boat around to the Kennedy Space Center because by then, those are very large chunks of materials, right, that you really can't just drive. Can you imagine driving down the highway and next to you is a solid rocket booster? Hey, Mom, look. The solid rocket booster takes up the entire highway, right? So instead, we don't do that. We do use a boat to get it around to the Kennedy Space Center. So in total, NASA has roughly about 17,000 employees of widely varying backgrounds. You'd be surprised some of the different skill sets at the agency. The oldest NASA center. Any guesses in the audience? None of the adults, just the kids. Which is the oldest NASA center? Langley is correct. That is right. NASA Langley is 100 years old, believe it or not. Does that surprise you? It was 100 years old. Last year we just celebrated that in 1917 is when Langley started. So last year was our 100 years. NASA as an agency will be 60 years old this year. So who in the room has seen Hidden Figures? It's a movie. I hope everybody's got their hand raised. And those who haven't, please go and see it. What a great movie. Hidden Figures was done at Langley. That's where those women worked back in the 1960s. It's an incredible story, isn't it? It really is beautiful. One of them is pictured right here. Another one of my colleagues, Dr. Christine Darden, still lives in the area and still have a chance to interact with her, which is great. These are pictures of our history. The original Mercury 7 astronauts actually trained at NASA Langley. We used to hang them with large bungee cords. I'm serious. It's already time. Huge gantry structure. We would hang them with large bungee cords off of that so they could practice weightlessness. Can you imagine coming to work? You're thinking, yeah, I'm really bad. I'm like the world's newest astronaut. What are we doing today? I'm going to hang you off some bungee cords today. Are you kidding me? But this is how they originally learned. So many of you may be wondering, so how did I go from being in an audience like you at one point in my life to standing up here, right? So let me just give you a little bit of my journey of discovery coming to NASA. How did I get here? Well, the first thing is it didn't actually start anywhere on this picture. It started in Trinidad. Both of my parents, there's some Trinis in the audience. I love it. That is fantastic. I think my parents are listening online or watching online, which actually is mildly frightening, right? But they're from Trinidad and Tobago. My father's family is from the north, and Santa Cruz. My mom's family is from the south in San Fernando. And those of you in the audience that know Trinidadian food and culture, you understand how we rule, right? Right? We don't fry chicken, we curry chicken, right? Right? There's no collard greens, there's callaloo, right? You know about these things, right? Rice and peas and roti and all these things, right? And so both of my parents were born and raised in Trinidad. I was born and raised in the United States, but within the four walls of our house, make no bones about it, it was Trinidad, okay? In all ways. And this is a beautiful picture of Trinidad from my own camera visiting the island. This is Toco in the upper right northeast corner of the island. What a beautiful place. You know, it wasn't until I was in my 20s and 30s that I realized the value, really, of having my family be from Trinidad. You know, one of the subtle things that came from that beautiful culture, you know, Trinidad's a very multicultural country. Everyone there is brown-skinned, and there's East Indians, there's people immigrated from Africa through the slave trade hundreds of years ago. There's Latinos on the island, and many other cultures on the island. But everybody's generally brown-skinned, so every single career field is done by people of color. If you're a doctor, if you're a surgeon, if you're a dentist, if you're a teacher, if you're a politician, if you're a head of state, you're brown-skinned. So in my head, when I said I wanted to be an engineer, I'm thinking there's no connection to me, my color, and my future. I never made any negative connection whatsoever. And to my parents' credit, you know, when I mentioned that I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, they were like, well, all right, let's go, right? There was no, oh, well, you know, honey, I just don't know about that. You know, there's not a lot of, I didn't get any of that. And so we just treated it like, well, let's roll. Let's go talk to some people about that. Let's find out what we can do about that. The panelists said this earlier, go and explore it, right? And that's exactly how it was treated. And so that matter-of-factness was because they had seen people that looked like them do all kinds of things. While I was the first aerospace engineer in my family, there were plenty of engineers in Trinidad, of course, right? So this subtlety it's actually a big deal. It changes how you think. And so growing up, you know, I grew up in a really small suburb of Washington, D.C. One stoplight. Now it looks totally different, but now at the time it had just one stoplight. I'm saying this because, you know, I meet students and they think somehow you end up at NASA and you like came from like amazing wealth. You went to fancy private schools, you had amazing tutors all over the place, you were building robots in your backyard, you were taking apart the television, you were wearing a lab coat since you were 5, right? Your glasses were this big, you know what I mean? And they had tape on them, right? And if you were a girl, oh, you know, you couldn't be girly. No, and that's nuts, right? I mean, in elementary school, I had Barbie dolls. I had a whole bunch of Barbie dolls, right? I played piano, I played some soccer. My room was really messy. And my mother was back there going, yep, I know. You know, they used to convince me to just make a pathway to the door so at least if there was a fire, I could get out safely, right? So I know there's some kids in the audience that are like, see, Mom, right? Trying to tell you nothing's wrong with me, right? So, you know, and then I mentioned my older brother. I don't know if he's listening or not, but, you know, we wrestled and fought like all siblings do. We still wrestle and talk trash together at this point in our life. And so there was no difference, right? We grew up normal, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, right? And we had a pretty normal existence. I read a lot of books, and I was a focused kid, and I had my large, extended Trinidadian family that brought a lot of culture and excitement. You know, I remember playing soccer, you know, and rec soccer, and my Uncle George would come and watch me play soccer, and you know Caribbean folks have no filter at all, right? So you're trying to play soccer, and you're just trying to fit in. I can hear him from the sidelines, Anna, kick the ball, Anna, run. I'm like, oh my gosh, really? You know what I'm saying? So if you have the embarrassing uncle out there, right, that happens to everybody. It doesn't matter what your future career is, really normal. So for the students, I hope you hear this. If I can come to NASA from this background, right, you can come to NASA. Okay? Just hear that, right? It was in middle school that I really began my first inspiration for flight. We grew up near Dulles Airport, and I used to watch the airplanes taking off overhead and just thought they were cool, right? And so kind of like what the panelists were saying, I just kind of explored that, like, well, wow, what could I do with that? What are the professions? I first thought about being a pilot because that was the first obvious one. And then I was like, well, what else can you do? I don't know. In the 9th grade, a really curious teacher gave us the opportunity to pick the topic for our report that we had to do. So I chose this unusual thing called aerospace engineering. And I didn't know what that really was at the time. My mom had mentioned something about engineering to me. And so I said, well, if I'm going to do a report anyway, let me do it on that. And so that caused me to really dig into what that would be. And that was it. So I chose my profession in the 9th grade, and I knew without a doubt this is what I wanted to do. But for the students here, I had to explore that. I had to go. This was before the internet, right? That was not in the Stone Ages. Just clarify that, okay? So I had to go to something called the library. There were books, pages and everything, right, to understand this. And so you have it a lot easier. You can go to, you can just take a computer and study these things and explore different career fields and really learn about them. And so by learning about it, I said, wow, this is what I wanted. It's exciting. And so that's what I did. And if you scroll forward 25 years into the future, I'm here at NASA, right? So my undergraduate was in aeronautical and astronautical engineering from Purdue University. My master's is in aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics from Old Dominion. And my PhD's in design science from the University of Michigan. In my 25 years at NASA, I've had a really blessed career. I had the chance to be a wind tunnel test engineer and a flight test engineer as a project manager for over a decade. I worked with DARPA and the National Science Foundation and with NATO. I've traveled to many different countries in collaborations with NASA, government to government. So some really exciting opportunities. So this looks all rosy, doesn't it? Well, it looks awesome. It looks nice and easy. She didn't have any challenges. That is just not the case, right? We all have speed bumps. We all have barriers in what we were doing. For me, when I was in high school, and again, I knew I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, I took that dream to my high school guidance counselor as a senior, and I was an honor roll student, and at the time, I was like, hey, I'm ready to apply to colleges, and I went looking for some of the better engineering schools. And my high school guidance counselor, when I told her I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, and I wanted to go to Purdue, which was number 3 in the world at the time, she laughed. She thought it was a crazy idea. And she said, that's nuts. I mean, why don't you go to a smaller school, an easier school to get into? Why don't you pick an easier major? I mean, that's really hard. And even if you did get into Purdue, you probably wouldn't finish, And so why don't you just, easier major, easier school, and it would just be a whole lot better for you, and I'm just trying to help you. And then I went to the principal, and he was like, well, I support my guidance counselor. She's just trying to help you, and that's what she told me. And so, to me, I'm thinking, well, that's nuts. One thing as a daughter of immigrants, right, once you leave your country to come here to get an education, right, the thought that you're not going to get educated is not an option, right, at all, right? And so, those in the audience, so I still remember, I called my mom, right, I was like, hey, Mom, I'm having some challenges here at the school. The guidance counselor doesn't kind of want to release my grades to Purdue, and I still remember hearing her shoes pound down the hallway at the school. Are there some mamas in this room that are like this, right, of all denominations, right, all demographics, right? A child asked me yesterday, they said, have you gone all bad, angry, Trini mama on your son for making a mistake? And I was like, ooh, can I plead the fifth on that one? If he's listening, he's like, oh, yes, she has, right? Thank goodness for angry mamas and daddies, right? that say, if I have anything to do with it, I'm going to make sure my kid gets what they need. You know, so when your parents stick up for you, just hug on your parents. They're there to help you and support you. And if your parents cannot, because they don't have enough information, there are other adults in your life that want to help you, really. And so for every child in this room, you're going to have these roadblocks. You're going to have those challenges. There will be people that do not believe in you. And it will always happen, no matter what you look like or where you come from. That will always happen, right? But there's so many more people that are for you than are against you. And just remember that. And so it's really getting comfortable with overcoming those challenges while you continue to pursue your dream and pursue that dream relentlessly. Not because there are challenges, but in spite of them, right? It's not the lack of challenges that makes you successful. And so many students think, I got to be rich, I got to be powerful, I got to be in the right neighborhood, the right school, the right teacher, the right counselor, the right parents, the right uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, and everything's got to be perfect for me to get to where I need to get to. And that is not the case. Every one of the panelists that stood up here today, right, could have your own story, what you overcame. Right? Am I right, panelists? Each of you had your challenges of stuff, junk that happened that made your life miserable, right? It is not the lack of challenges. It is your response to them that counts, right? It really isn't the lack of challenges that makes you successful. It is really how you choose to respond to them, right? So like, just like when you get to a speed bump, right? You had to slow down, sure, to go over that speed bump. But what do? You roll over it, right? All of you who are in sports here, sometimes you have games that are not so good. You get kicked, you get punched, you fall over, you get hit, right? And it's not that fun. You put a Band-Aid on, you put some ice on it, and what do? You get back in the game, right? And so those speed bumps are going to happen. Right? And so I would encourage you to not let the challenges that you see in front of you be an impediment to your future, just realizing that's a challenge. And sometimes a challenge is somebody else's thinking. My guidance counselor, that was her problem. It was not mine. She had her wrong thinking, and I did not let it become my wrong thinking. And that's really important, right? When someone tries to speak something into you. And part of this is our own language. I'm going to show you the next video. And these are of some of my colleagues at NASA Langley in particular. And for every person that you are about to see in these videos, most of them did not go to a private school. They didn't grow up rich and powerful. They didn't have some special hand dealt to them. They're regular people just like me and just like you. Hear their stories of some of the amazing work they are doing today for NASA. Take a listen.
At NASA Langley, I work to protect astronauts from harmful space radiation, especially for the long journey to Mars.
I develop inflatable heat shields for spacecraft that will allow us to reduce the cost of sending things to space and even let us land humans on Mars.
At NASA Langley, I design inflatable habitats.
I test space capsules so astronauts can land safely in the ocean. I imagine, then engineer, far-out missions to explore the solar system and beyond.
I analyze building blocks for new space missions, a passion I share with students to excite them about engineering.
At NASA Langley, I create systems to make machines smarter so they can act independently, even in outer space.
At NASA Langley, I use robots to design lightweight, energy-efficient structures for air and spacecraft.
At NASA Langley, I design systems that allow small satellites to link themselves together to allow more flexible construction in space.
I create new materials for aircraft and spacecraft, and some of them end up in everyday products.
At NASA Langley, I build instruments that monitor and track the recovery of the ozone layer from the International Space Station.
I study how accurately we need to measure clouds from satellites to get a better idea of how climate is changing.
So we can make smarter and more cost-effective decisions about climate change.
I measure air quality using satellites so we can all breathe easier.
I fly airplanes to improve aviation technology and climate science.
At NASA Langley, I crash aircraft to make them safer.
I test wind tunnel models at NASA Langley to design planes that are quieter, more fuel efficient, and produce fewer emissions.
At NASA Langley, I develop environmentally friendly electric aircraft that are going to transform aviation.
So that is work happening at one NASA center. And this is happening with ordinary people, right, who probably also had messy bedrooms and wrestled with their older brother, right, when they were growing up. And so, for the students in the room, I want to really encourage you and emphasize what the panel mentioned earlier, is explore your future. Most students spend more time playing video games than they do planning their future. In high school, most students spend more time planning for prom than planning their time in college, right? And so this time between middle school and their mid-20s, right, that 10-year window is so incredibly important. You are defining your future in that window and making some crucial decisions about your future. So taking that seriously and then realizing the beauty that is within you. And what I mean by that is, for every student that's in here, for them to realize what you are going to invent, I can't invent. There's no two humans that are exactly the same. So my journey will not be yours because you have something I don't have. And for every student in here, right, there's something in you that none of those people in those videos have because you have an idea in your head that nobody else has. So we need every single person to contribute to making this planet a better place to live. And that has nothing to do with demographics or where you're from, right? No one's excluded from that, right? So the joy that is in you, the beauty that's in you, your background, your culture, what you bring to the table is incredible. And to just explore that and don't be limited. Don't let your mind be limited about, well, I can't really do this and I can't really do that. Because I can tell you something, if you want to be someplace you've never been before, you'll have to do something you've never done before, right? And so it may not, just because, well, I'm not sure, I don't know, I didn't know, right? There wasn't an aerospace engineer in my bedroom looking at me, right? I had to go and explore it, right? So you're going to have to step out there and do something totally different and new, and that's really fine and really okay. And personally, I got to tell you, if I had stopped at I can't, I would never have gotten to I did, right? So when you hear these voices in your head, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, what is up with that, right? You're never going to know your capacity until you go beyond what you think you can't do and just explore that. And it's not because you think you're going to be successful, rather, but because you're going to learn on the journey no matter what. A lot of folks have said, Anna, you seem confident. I was like, you're actually confusing this. I'm just okay with failure. I really am. I would rather fail trying something new than not to try it at all. Because in the pathway to there, you learn all kinds of great things that you may be able to use somewhere else, right? And so when somebody else may say, well, maybe you can't do that, again, that's their wrong thinking. It doesn't have to be yours. And if it comes in your head that you say, well, I can't, and I can't, and I can't, I want you to challenge yourself and say, well, maybe I can try. Is there an adult? Is there a mentor I can work with that will help me get through this particular place to a place of, I did. Think of most of what we do at NASA has never been done before. It's not in a book someplace, right? If you're looking for, is there a solution that I can just pick up someplace? Many times we are creating something brand new. So it has never been done before. We have to get beyond it's never to where we're gonna, right, all the time. And it's that journey of discovery, to me, that is so exciting, right? And so as we begin looking at NASA, I'm going to show you some glimpses of sort of the future of where NASA is headed to and where they're going. And for the teachers in the audience, there are many ways to look at this. You can challenge your students with some of these same problems and ask them some provocative questions about these same topic areas. For the students in the room, right, most of what NASA does is on our website. You can go and follow a lot of our research and see what we do in a bit more detail. So this is going to be a glimpse of what NASA's plans are for this year, for 2018. What are we up to this year? Some really cool things. Take a look. So for the teachers in the room, many of those things are online. Really. And for the students, if you're saying, what is happening? I've heard, is it the end of the space era? Are you kidding me? Right? Are you kidding me? Right. Before many of you leave to go to school or to go to work, you tap into between 2 to 5 different satellites. Your GPS, some of you have satellite TV, weather, right? All of those are space-based systems, right, that we rely upon every single day. So one example of some of the work that we're doing in earth science, for example, is we take a look. So our earth science area is so vital to our survival here, really. We must understand how our weather, how our climate is changing. And one of the best ways to explore that is doing so from space. Right, so we actually connect heliophysics, which is studying the physics of the sun, all the way to astrophysics, and blend that with our earth science here, and have an integrated program of science. If you look at science by the numbers, this is our current work that we're doing on earth science. Right, the balloon payloads actually are often done with student payloads, where we can put experiments that students develop and fly them on a balloon payload, which means these balloons go literally up through the atmosphere. Right, where we can study them all the way up. 10,000 U.S. scientists are currently funded in our earth science program. right now, overhead all of us, there are 20 different spacecraft that are orbiting our planet and studying it to improve our understanding of Earth science. So when a teacher tells me, I don't have anything I can really share with the students on Earth science, it's the same old, I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? Put them online. Say, hey, what is orbiting right now that you can take a look at? Can you follow the path of just one of the satellites that are overhead right now? What is that satellite measuring? How is it relevant to your current assignment, right? And you can challenge them to go take a look at that. This Parker Solar Probe is so exciting. This summer it's going to be launched, right? And so what a great opportunity for our students. You know, things are being launched very frequently, I think more frequently than the news media shows, because we've gotten kind of used to it, right? Don't things always launch? And so this summer, the Parker Solar Probe is launching. It'll be the closest spacecraft ever to visit the sun and take really close measurements. At one point in its journey, this spacecraft will be traveling, you ready for this number? Over 200,000 miles per hour. It would be equivalent to going from here to Tokyo in a minute, okay? Really incredible. This spacecraft will have to withstand the sun's radiation and its heat, right? So incredible numbers. And so for students to have an opportunity to understand, you know, what is this thing measuring? How can we use that here? What is a solar flare? Why do we care about solar flares? Ask them that question. What a great science fair project to do, right? That's really relevant that we have data on right now. So in Earth science, I mentioned that we have multiple things overhead right now. Here is an example of some of them that have been flying overhead in our beautiful orbit that's over us. And each one of these you can track, actually, and see what it's measuring and the data that's coming off of that. We often partner with many countries to do this work because this isn't not a U.S. problem. This is an international challenge. So we work with, I think, over 70 different countries in our earth science research to share the data, the knowledge, and the understanding. So even that, I mean, think about teaching a student about earth science, about connecting with other countries, and say, you know, can you tell me who NASA is partnering with in India, right? In France, in Spain, what countries are we, and why are we working with that country? What is that country doing? So then they can bring geography together with science, right? At the same time. So many lessons can be blended together. So Mars, we've been on Mars for over 40 years, right? What a fascinating place to go. There's so much rich data that we can take. We are launching another robot this year, 2018, and again in 2020. The reason we're doing this every 26 months, anybody know? Some of the geeks in this room, and geek is a good thing, right? Mars is closest to Earth about every 26 months. So that's when we try to launch, right? So you can ask your students, hey, can you tell me when the next time Mars is going to be close to the Earth? What a great science challenge, right? And that will line up with NASA's launch dates for when it's going to be launched next. Cassini. It finished its multi-year journey last September. It explored Saturn, some of the most amazing pictures of Saturn, right? Talk about a deep space probe. And it went its last dives, it went in and out of the rings of Saturn before it dove and crash landed on the surface of Saturn, creating some beautiful imagery that the students can go and look up today. We are currently working on the James Webb Space Telescope. This will be our next great mission. Oops. I'm not sure what just happened. Oh, it's back up. So this is currently being designed at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, and this will be able to show us some beautiful parts of our solar system and even some of the history of our solar system. This is it being tested today to be ready for launch in the near future. So our future explorers, this is our most recent astronaut cadet corps. Students, can you see yourself here? There's no reason you couldn't be there. Our astronauts come from varied backgrounds, right? They're not all engineers. Some of them are scientists, they're pilots. Some of them are doctors. Many different backgrounds. All astronauts, by the way, are well-rounded. They have something that they do outside of their STEM-based area. They play an instrument. They play a sport. So they are all of them are well-rounded, and it's a requirement, actually, to be a part of the astronaut corps. So your extracurricular activities are incredibly valuable in many ways. What we are planning on having these astronauts use in the future is our Orion capsule, and it will be launched aboard our Space Launch System, the world's largest rocket. It's being put together right now at the Marshall Space Flight Center. The Orion capsule is being tested in many areas. You've seen many places around NASA, rather. You've seen some pictures earlier of us dropping this capsule on water at NASA Langley, right? So we understand when our astronauts are going to have a crash landing, what are they going to feel? Some really cool stuff. This is a shell around it where we're testing it. And then also these parachute landings to slow them down as they're coming in, right? So a question for the students, how fast would it come in, right? And then how much would the parachute slow it down? Some great examples. The engines that the SLS is going to be using are the most powerful ever developed in the world. Some of the propellants like liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, incredibly powerful, simple materials that can create a lot of thrusts. So now, this is Orion. Our first mission is to that's not cool. I don't know what's cool to you. Okay, seriously, right? What's amazing about this is not science fiction, right? You don't have to go to the movie theater to see this. You can go to your home computer and see this. This is happening right now. This is in the life of our current students. They're going to see this rocket take off. They're going to see this rocket take astronauts into the moon and then to Mars in their lifetime. And all of this is available online for our students and teachers to have access to and to show them that science is real and science can be used to do amazing things. And even right now, as we speak, we're in our 18th year of our International Space Station, where we collaborate with many different nations. And we do experiments in microgravity that we really can't do here on Earth. And these experiments are available, again, online where you can see what is happening. You know, the space station, the amount of space on it is roughly like a 5-bedroom house, right? And the astronauts live and work up there, and we learn about space travel. We learn about the effects of space on the human body and conduct quite a few experiments. Here are some examples of what we do on the space station. A lot of them are biological experiments, right? And there's always some fun videos, by the way, online of what's happening overhead right now. There are people aboard the International Space Station. And so our commercial crew, many of you are aware of SpaceX work and Boeing. You know, absolutely, space will become more and more commercialized as we go forward. So we collaborate with Boeing and SpaceX in a joint venture to make space accessible to so many of in our future. Technology is a huge part of where we're going, and so we fund a lot of space technology advancement. many of which are done with our university partners all over the country, even doing 3D printing in space. Some really cool stuff. Some of the work we're doing, talk about innovation. We're looking at even smaller and smaller spacecraft. So I just showed you the biggest spacecraft ever. This video is showing some of our smallest spacecraft. Can we use smaller, cheaper, lighter spacecraft where we can still get some really amazing data, right? Now, this is a really cool little simple video. You know, a tape measure that you might roll out at your house. Taking that same idea, students, that may sound like a crazy idea, but this is rolling out a solar panel, right, and a solar array in space where we can use that solar array, right, to power the spacecraft, because you can't take all the energy you need in space with you. You have to get some of it while you're there. So literally using the same mental model of a tape measure that you would see in your house in space. So innovation is just a cool thing, right, where something as simple that you have in your house can inspire something in space. And so, you know, we all know that most kids spend too much time online, right? But this is one website most adults are going to say, go for it, right? NASA.gov, there's all kinds of stuff out there, right? And so teachers enjoy it. There's so much stuff that you can follow and see what we're doing. And just in general, there's a plethora of online STEM-related opportunities. .gov sites, there are tons. National Science Foundation, even the NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, the Department of Defense has some incredible things online that's accessible to parents, to students, to teachers. TED Talks are wonderful venues. Nonprofits like the one Lin Yan and Student Klebe are a part of. Even professional society. You know, the American Society for Mechanical Engineers, the National Society of Black Engineers, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, and on and on and on, all have opportunities for students and parents and teachers to be a part of that are already out there. Their websites are loaded with information. So I would encourage all of those that are listening to really explore what's out there. And this, you know, the beautiful part about it, having it online is there are libraries everywhere. So even if in your house you don't have a fancy computer or no one in your family knows about some of these things, go to your local library, students, and you can look these things up on your own and see what's out there, right? So this makes science and STEM available to every single person. No matter where you come from, you can get access to STEM information online using your local library. So what about your future, right? And how are you exploring that, right? What are you going to do to look at it? Here's a small glimpse of what's happening for the future of aeronautics and aviation. There's a really interesting report called Aviation, the Real World Wide Web. What's interesting about this report, it shows how we think of aviation just as, you know, us getting to visit grandma or you know, delivering your Amazon package. But if you look at it holistically for our teachers, right, this report shows how aviation has changed how we live. It has enabled us to understand how animals in Africa are going extinct, and we can fly there. We can take a PhD biologist from somewhere in the United States and fly them out to a remote village in Africa and help advance technology there to save a remote ant, which we could not do before. So this beautiful report shows history, it shows geography, it shows how culture is being changed by one technology, and that is flight. And there's so many more examples like that. Let me show you some examples. This is a picture of a small village out in China, Hunan, China. They create a beautiful flower that is shipped all over the world. Now, the people that live in this small village, they don't want to live in New York City as wonderful as it is here, right? They're excited about maintaining their lifestyle out in their village. How they're able to do that is they're able to ship their flower fresh all over the world using air travel, right? So this is where we blend the study of human culture with aviation, right? So we tend to think of the future of aviation as all the Jetsons and big fancy things, but sometimes it's just preserving the culture that we want, right? So on board the aircraft that you see today is a whole lot of advanced technology. A lot of it came from NASA, as you can see there. This is a picture of what's on board aircraft today as you're flying. Almost every single aircraft that is flying today has NASA technology on it. When we look at the future of flight, we know that unmanned aircraft will be a part of it. And that may frighten you. I'm going to be flying next to an unpiloted aircraft. The answer is yes. That will occur. We're studying it, though. We're on it. Just want to let you know. NASA's on. I'm serious. We're like literally on this one. Understanding how can we do that in a safe fashion. One of the ways we do this and how we study this, right? We take an aircraft that we know really well, the Cirrus SR-22 aircraft. We outfit it so that it can fly on its own. We do put a pilot on board and just ask him or her not to touch the controls unless absolutely necessary. But this is a way for us to explore, understand, discover. Make the mistakes, understand what happens when it doesn't happen, right? So to the students, you don't have to get it all right the first time. Exploration is a part of discovery and learning and innovation. So this is how we test new ideas out. So I mentioned the Jetsons earlier. Some of the students are going, what's the Jetsons? And if you're laughing, that means you're old enough to have watched the Jetsons growing up, right? And so some may want this vision of the future of New York City. Is this the future we really want to have? It's an interesting question. So I think something fun to ask your students, what kind of future do you want? What are some cool technologies you'd like to see? And what are the implications of that technology on how you live? For example, do we still want to have neighborhoods like this somewhere in our world? And can you do that with what I just showed, the Jetson era? How can you maintain this? Or even just fish markets in a place like downtown Brooklyn, right? How do we maintain some of the things we enjoy about our culture? So this is really blending the social sciences with the natural sciences and history and culture, right? With technology. How can we do that? Even these this is a picture of Norway, right? And it's incredible, right? How do we keep these places like this healthy and strong, still using technology? You know, one of the interesting things, there's been a lot of discussion about, do we have enough food to feed our growing population? There's enough land all over our world to feed us. Getting to it's a challenge. Can we fly a farmer and their equipment out to a remote field like this and do the farming we need to without having to plow roads all the way there, for example, right? So there are many creative ways of solving some of our challenges that we need today. Challenge your students and say, how would you solve this problem? What could we do, right? Flying a large farming equipment out there is not crazy. I think it's creative, right? Here's an example of a creative idea of a future commercial aircraft. We partnered with MIT and Aurora Flight Sciences. So we take this idea and then we test it out, right? We put it in a wind tunnel and blow air over it. Does it fly like we planned on it, right? What's wrong with it? What's right with it? And how can we iterate on that idea for the future? Here's another future aircraft. This is a blended wing body. This will probably be a part of our future of flight. When you go to JFK or LaGuardia, you'll see this thing rolling up. Right? And so for you students, right, just get a little history here. So some of the students laughed earlier when I said I was born before the internet came around, right? So there's going to be a point where your kids are going to say, wait a minute, Dad, this wasn't flying when you were growing up? Well, you're really old, right? That will happen to you students, just so you understand. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of the same configuration. And I'm saying this to show how creativity, failure, learning are normal. So this is one of the early configurations, right? And this is what the engines look like, or the wings look like. Another configuration, slightly different, right? Totally different back part of this aircraft. There are many ways to solve this problem. So we can take the same basic idea of a large lifting body. Here, the fuselage is a lifting body like a wing, like a large wing, like a stingray, right? And then yet, here's another idea of the same concept. So exploring new ideas is a normal part of science, right? And don't be afraid to try something totally different. Say, how else could you take that? So teachers, maybe you ask the students, okay, this is what somebody's looking at. What would you do to change it? And why would you change it? Right? What's an example of how you can change that? So supersonic flight, right? Over land is what we would love to be able to do more commonly, not just for military jets, for us, for commercial flight. What are some of the challenges of making that happen? These are some of the early configurations of doing that. Part of the challenge is the huge sonic bump that happens, and the boom that hits the ground literally rattles windows, right, and scares people. If you've ever heard a sonic boom and you weren't prepared for it, good grief, is it loud. I think it's awesome because I'm an engineer. I'm like, that's so cool. Somebody else broke the sound barrier. You know, I work and live near an airport. I live and work right next to Langley Air Force Base, and they're always flying their jets supersonic. And those of us that work there, we just think it's cool, right? Our guests come like, how do you work with all the jet noise? And we're like, what are you talking about? How do you work without jet noise, right? When you can go outside and go, oh yeah, there's another Raptor that's flying by, right? And so take a look at this quick video. This shows you some of the work we are doing in supersonic flight and some of the challenges of that.
NASA has been working for decades, essentially, on looking at technologies to take the boom out of boom. We'd like to have sonic thump or just sonic sound. And the idea is to design the airplane so that the shock waves that are produced in supersonic flight are arranged in such a way that you don't have a boom. You have just kind of a general gradual pressure rise which produces a quiet sound. So there are a number of challenges associated with supersonic travel in general. We want the airplanes to be environmentally friendly, so we want them to be quiet around the airport, and we also want them to have low emissions. NASA has worked on a number of technologies which could reduce the noise of sonic boom. Right now we're doing the preliminary design. We call that activity Quest for quiet supersonic technology. So we've tested them in wind tunnels, but now the next phase is to take the technologies and test them in flight. So to do that, we're building an X-plane design and the eventual low-boom flight demonstration aircraft that represents the boom of a larger airplane. The idea is to prove the technology, show how robust it is in a variety of atmospheric conditions, but ultimately to prove that the sound that's created is acceptable to people on the ground.
NASA is conducting supersonic research with a lot of different organizations around the country. But primarily our role is, getting the data for supersonic flight. One of the primary things we have to do initially is get the atmospheric data so we understand the effect of the atmosphere, real atmosphere on the sonic boom. But then the real data for regulatory change required is just really taking measurements on the ground and then doing surveys of the population to see what the annoyance of those much quieter sonic booms are. It should sound like a thump, so it could be that people don't even notice the sonic boom, and that's what we want to. That's really the data that we're talking about for regulatory change.
So supersonics has kind of been a dream for a long time. Cut your travel time in half. It's a good industry for the U.S. to be getting into. As subsonic commercial airplanes are being built worldwide now, we need some new markets, some new vehicles to maintain our leadership in commercial aviation.
Look at that. This is what that same aircraft that he just showed you, what we're doing in the wind tunnel. We take a model of it and try the idea out. Really long, skinny nose. I literally work in a building where this is being tested now, a 14 by 22 foot wind tunnel. We take smoke flows. We literally take a boom, we take smoke and blow it over the wings so we can understand the airflow over the wings while we're testing it. We even take oil and we smear it, special oils, very expensive oils. This is not Crisco, right? And we put it on the aircraft, and we can see where all the lines of flow are going. So we see where there's any issues in detail, every single crevice on the aircraft. And so next, I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective on inspiration and preparation. So many students tell me that, I'm not sure what I want to do, and I'm inspired by a few things, but I don't know what to do with that. My suggestion to them is explore that and prepare for it. When you take what inspires you and you add some preparation to that, then you can really take that to the next step. And I think many students are waiting for it to just fall out of the sky. I'm just going to somehow it's just going to happen to me. That could happen. But often, if you take the nugget of an idea, I like animals. To me, it was airplanes, whatever it might be, right? And you explore that a little more. Go on the internet, talk to a teacher, talk to a professor, go to a local university, go to a museum, one of our panelists mentioned, and explore that idea a little bit more so you can see what you could do with that idea. You have the internet, right? There's so much information out there. And if you don't take the time to do this, right, if you fail to plan, and my son has heard me say this a million times, then you plan to fail. And that sounds harsh, but you know what? So for the students in the room right now, how many of you play a sport of some sort? Many of you do. Or play an instrument. Some of you play an instrument as well? right? So let me ask you a question. If you play a sport, do you just run out on the field with no plan? Your coach has no idea what you're doing. You can just run in circles on the field. You can kind of do whatever you want. You don't know the score. You don't know the rules. Would that actually work very well? Not really, right? And if you're playing an instrument, we saw that violinist play earlier, right? If he had no plan, he was just going to play any old thing, however he wanted. He wasn't going to look at music or anything like that. Would he have sounded like he did? Of course not. The same thing happens with your future, right? If you don't take some effort to think about what you're going to do next and what implications that might have, right, then you're not going to be sufficiently prepared. And so for all those things, right, you wouldn't get on a bus going nowhere. You get on the metro here in New York going to a certain location. So where are you headed? Is my question to the students. Where are you headed? And what are some roads to get there? And what plan are you going to have? I hear students tell me, well, I just need to get a lucky break. I'm so unlucky. If things can just be easier for me, it would be so much better. Here's my definition of luck. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? If you are not prepared, it doesn't matter how awesome that opportunity is if you can't take advantage of it. So your job is to get as well educated as you possibly can, to be as well prepared as you possibly can, in middle school, in high school, and then after high school, either in a trade school, right, in a college or university, or some sort of training opportunity, so that when the opportunities come along, you're ready to take advantage of them so you can get, quote, lucky, right? Now, I mentioned this earlier. It isn't the lack of challenges along the way. And when things happen that make things a little bit more difficult, remember, it's your response to those challenges. Every single successful person can tell you about their story of challenges that they have faced. And some part of this, when we look at innovation, it's easy to say and get hampered by, well, I'm different than other biologists. I'm different than other aerospace engineers. They don't look like me. They don't sound like me. Look, I don't fit in, okay? How many aerospace engineers look like me? Not a bunch. And you know what? I really don't care. I gotta tell you, right? I mean, literally, God made me who I am. As I mentioned earlier, every single person brings something unique to the table. And then innovation often occurs where different ideas and viewpoints intersect. So let's bring the differences in. And I know for many students, your goal is to fit in, and that's your highest goal, but actually it may be why you don't fit in is the reason you bring the biggest innovation to the table, right? And so rock your difference, right? And just enjoy it. It may be the very reason you help make the next breakthrough in science, right? You don't have to fit in to be successful at all. Your difference can be beautiful. So for our educators, and I'll close on this note, asking questions, right, is a beautiful way of teaching students. Ask, how might we do this? How might we fix this problem? So I'm saying, here's the answer, just accept it as is. Why is that answer working? Do you know why that answer makes sense? And how else might you solve? Very often there isn't just one way to solve a problem. There's usually many of them. And so problem-solving techniques are huge, right? If students understand how to solve a problem that was mentioned earlier, then you give them some tools for success. Growth mindset. Many schools are already talking about growth mindset. I can't encourage that enough. There are tons of books and literature on that. If you don't know what that is, please look it up. It's basically growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, which suggests, well, I've never done this before. I can't do this, and I can't grow. The effort is worth it alone, because the effort of learning helps expand your mind and how you solve problems. I'll mention design thinking as well, something else you can Google. It's a very creative approach to problem solving. Design thinking is being used in hundreds and hundreds of companies all over the world to make them more innovative. Even at NASA, I just led a NASA team through a design thinking experiment. You can bring design thinking into schools. And then practical applications are always so much more interesting, right? If you can see how something is used. For me, when I was in college, I thought I wanted to do airflow around aircraft. It was what I thought I was going to be interested in. And when I tried that out at NASA, I was like, well, this is interesting. It's not bad. But then, I took a structures class, and the class was boring. I got to tell you, the class was so boring. I was thinking, I'll never do this. Until I had an internship at NASA. And I had a chance to do structures and structural dynamics on the International Space Station. That was awesome. Really awesome. And then I said, this is what I want to do right here. Right? So the class wasn't that interesting, is what I'm trying to tell you. The teacher was kind of boring too. But the application, now that was really awesome. Right? So anytime we can get our students to get their hands on the practical applications of what they're learning, then their eyes light up. Right? It may sound something as simple as understanding area, right? That you would learn in math or geometry. That sounds so boring. Let me tell you something, or even weight in math. You know, we have to paint our spacecraft, otherwise they would corrode. Paint weighs something. So for every pound you put on that spacecraft, you have to add some more fuel to get it off the ground. So ask them a question. How much paint would it take to cover the Orion space capsule? And have them calculate. That's a real problem. Right? And they're not even going to know their learning area. Shh, don't tell them. Right? And weight and mass and everything else. Right? So there's a lot of practical problems we can give students that makes it so much more interesting. And there's, again, online resources to have those kinds. The NASA.gov website, tons and tons of resources for educators. I mentioned design thinking earlier. This is an example from one company called IDEO. Really creative approach to solving a problem. I won't go over it here, but I'll leave it to you just to Google and look up later on. So with that, I'm going to close with the big idea of explore your future, because it is grand. The opportunities are endless for every single student, no matter where you come from. If I can come from my family from Trinidad to NASA, you can come from wherever you are, to wherever you want to get to. And so with that, I'm going to thank Ms. Klebe and Ms. Yen for having me here, and I would love to take questions, either now or later. So Dr. Borges, I think you have... Wow. It's 9:10. Absolutely.
Things and then we'll do questions. Is that okay? Okay. Oh, I think so I think that now we're just going to, if anyone has any questions, we'll take any questions now, and then we'll conclude the evening.
Okay. Yes, because sure. So I can take any questions from students or teachers or parents. Yes, ma'am. Definitely. So we hire so many, I don't remember the number, I think it's hundreds of different types of backgrounds. We have tons of electrical engineers, chemical engineers, chemists, physicists, geologists, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, almost every type of engineering you can think of we hire at the agency, absolutely. There are many different backgrounds. You can go on our website and see. And even for the astronaut program, we hire medical doctors that study the effect of space flight on the human body. And so, yes, there are many different professions that can be used. NASA is also an organization. So even from the business management side of the house, we have accountants that help organize our money. We have attorneys. We have business leaders that help us lead our organizations. And so almost every profession that you would use to run any other organization is needed to help run NASA. We have even creative artists that draw. Many of the movies I showed you were created by graphic artists. Something I want to say to the parents and teachers. What the words you say to students. And I'm just going to key off your question here. I've heard a parent say, well, my son's really creative, and so I told him he should not go into engineering because you really can't be creative there. Right? You know what I mean? And so we hire graphic artists at NASA to help create some of the imagery that we need, right? So there's many different professions that are brought together to make aerospace a reality. What a great question. Thank you for that. Fantastic. Yes, ma'am, in the middle. One more time? How do I deal with what? Competition. Oh, how do I deal with competition? Well, Sometimes it is daunting, there's no question. Sometimes it is overwhelming. And you know what? That is always going to be the case. And so, you know, I needed mentors around me that would encourage me and remind me that I still could do something, right? I tried to also remember that the gift that I'm bringing to the table may be different than the person next to me. So I'm trying not to compare myself to everybody else, but rather to myself and what I can bring to the table, which will be different than the person next to me, right? Because no two people are the same. And that tends to be what helps me the most, not get discouraged, honestly. Great question. Great question.
Here.
In the back, I thought.
Does NASA do any like land-based operations, like for instance the Hyperloop?
Yes, we do land-based operations. What a great question. Absolutely. We do actually thousands of experiments on the ground. You know, at NASA Langley, where I work, it has over 800 acres, literally. I think we have over 21 different buildings, all ground test facilities where we have chemistry laboratories, materials laboratories, we have wind tunnels, we have durability facilities where we shake and bend and twist materials all the time. And so absolutely, we have a great deal of ground-based laboratories all over the country where we study many different phenomena. Fantastic question. Most NASA engineers don't leave the ground. Fantastic question. Yes, ma'am.
She keeps on calling on people.
Absolutely. And you know, that still happens today, right? I mean, I've heard parents say in front of their student, their child, well, you know, my daughter really likes math. Isn't that weird? Like, what? Are you kidding me? You know, someone who's had 7 years of calculus, you know, women can rock calculus pretty well, right? You know? And so one of the things I love about engineering is intellectually leveling. You got a brain, you can do it. Right? It doesn't matter how poor you were growing up. Your brain is just as strong, right? And so how do we educate those who don't know? I think we visit the schools. I think, you know, what Lynn Yen and what Suzanne Klebe did this week, they had me visit many different schools this week to get the word out, to change that mindset. So I think it's reaching the neighborhoods and getting out there and communicating helps change that mindset. It's absolutely crucial. And to be fair, many of the people that gave us these messages had never seen us before. We were alien life forms to them, right? And so let's make the alien human, right? By bringing that message out there and breaking some of the stereotypes, you know? When I was growing up, I was told, well, if you're going to be an engineer, you have to be kind of masculine, right? And girls really can't be, that's ridiculous, right? You know? I mean, I'm a mom, right? I'm still a female, right? And so are my colleagues. And exposure is so crucial. I'm just going to give you a fun example of exposure and how it changes mindsets. So a lot of my friends are also women engineers who are also moms, right? So when my son was very young, we'd get together on play dates with our kids and play. And so at one point, he had a chance to meet somebody else, a male colleague. I said, oh, so-and-so is also an engineer, sweetheart. And, you know, he was, I think, about 2 or 3 at the time, and he kind of crinkled his little nose, and he was like, well, Mommy, he can't be an engineer. And I was like, no. And he fit the more stereotypical look of an engineer, right, than my colleagues. And he was like, well, he can't be. I was like, well, why couldn't he be an engineer? And he said, but only mommies are engineers. And I was like, and I had never consciously said, but his data sample was mommies in engineering, right? So it just shows you how exposure can change your mindset completely, right? And so exposure, I think, is the biggest deal, you know, getting that message out to many different people so people say, wow, mommies are mathematicians, right? You know? And that seems normal to them. This is what I mentioned earlier in Trinidad. Every profession is done by brown-skinned people. So it never even, still doesn't occur to me that there's any limitation between race and competence. There's no limitations to what you can do, no matter where you come from. Great question. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question over here. She's been waiting.
I don't know where it is. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll get right back to you.
Hi. Do you think there'll be commercial flights to space in our lifetime?
Yes. I do. I do think there will be commercial flights to space in our lifetime. The problem is, your commercial may not be my commercial, may not be Donald Trump's commercial, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's who it's commercial for may be the question, right? Apparently, there's already a list of people who are ready to go to space and pay the umpteen millions of dollars to get there. So seriously, yes, I do believe there'll be commercial space flight in your lifetime. Absolutely. Fantastic question. Yes, ma'am. Ah, what a great question. So our Earth Science program that I showed you earlier, it is led by Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, University of Michigan, PhD. I just got to say that because I'm a Michigan graduate student as well, right? So that entire program is all about understanding the science of our planet Earth. And the science of our planet Earth is about our environment, right? About the climate that we have, about the weather. We understand things like how, foresting concepts, affect the air above, smoke, environmental pollution, and melting. We can measure how the polar ice caps are melting from space actually quite accurately. When there's a major weather system that is occurring, that is often measured very accurately from our satellite systems overhead. And so absolutely, take a look at NASA's Earth Science program. I think you'll be warmly surprised. It's really exciting. Yes, ma'am. Oh my word, yes. So, someone asked me earlier, what was one of the most challenging part of your job? What's most challenging is most interesting. Science is changing so fast and technology is advancing so quickly. It used to be that technology advanced about a generation or two at a time, right? It took about 25 years for a major technological leap to happen. Now that's shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. You can see that just from what we're holding in our hands, our phones, right? The iPhone was just created in 2007. Can you believe that, right? You can see how fast things are changing. Now we have the watch, right? The little teeny thing here, right? And so things are changing so rapidly. So absolutely, all of us that work at NASA, we spend an awful lot of time reading and learning. We are perpetual students. And I have books all over my house. I have books all over my office. I am constantly learning and growing, reading new materials all the time. Absolutely. So this journey of learning is near and dear to my heart because I'm doing it all the time myself. Absolutely. Great question.
We have one more
I
question.
actually went back to get my PhD late in my career to learn more. Yes.
One more question.
How did you cultivate a mindset of relentlessness?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Wow. How did I cultivate a mindset of relentlessness? I have to say it started with parents who wouldn't really allow you to do anything different than that, right? Really? My parents were a great inspiration to me, and they really encouraged my brother and I both to dream large, right? And, they both came to the United States with one-way tickets because they couldn't afford a round-trip ticket. They came with one suitcase, so that's all they had. So that immigrant mentality really, it breeds in you that relentlessness. I've got to make it because I am here. I don't have a lot of support systems in this country, and look, it's got to work. And if it doesn't, I got to find a way to make it work, right? And so that, I think, really just infused in me, honestly. And they didn't say that, but that was how my family all thought. My grandparents none of them had any more than a 10th grade education, but the same mental model. Look, if it doesn't work, I'm going to have to find a way to make it work, right? We're going to have this happen here. So I honestly think it came from our humble backgrounds on that little island of Trinidad and Tobago, and then being around people, finding mentors and other people who had that same mindset. right? That would, I would tell my teams at NASA, impossible just takes a little bit longer, right? And do I meet people who don't have that attitude? Yes. And they're discouraging, I'll be honest with you. So then I find people who have that fire in their eyes, are like, let's do this, right? This may not work, but I am willing to journey with you to try this kind of crazy idea and see what we learn in the process. And man, when you work with someone who's fired up, it just gives you chills, right? It's awesome. So surrounding myself with exciting people. So for you as a student, you're going to have some friends that are going to be the negative talkers, right? I haven't never done this before. I don't want to do this. I just want to stay home. Why are we doing this? Those kind of friends, right? You got to find yourself some new friends, right? So find yourself some friends who also want to have that relentless pursuit of success, right? I didn't have a ton, to be fair, myself, to be honest with you. I had a few here and there. So find yourself some of those people. Right? Because, there's psychologists say we're often the sum total of our closest friends that are around us, right? So surround yourself with some awesome, right? I'm happy to take questions for a while. Those who need to leave, please don't feel any shame in your game. But those who want to ask questions, I'm happy to take more questions. Or if Ms. Borges, Dr. Borges, has more.
I just wanted to know if the kids, Dr. Riccio over here made a great suggestion. If the kids want to come up and take a photo with Dr. McGowan, is that fine?
Sure thing. Don't mind.
Is this mic still live? I just wanted to mention to people that if you guys want to find out more about the music science program, we have people outside.
Outside, the foundation is going to have sign-ups for their 5-week program. And if anyone have any questions regarding this NYU Center for K-12 STEM Education teacher programs or student programs, I'm up here. I'll take your questions. And I have business cards.